Hey, what's going on, my friend? Chris here from Mixdown Online, and today I'm going to share with you my top 5 vocal reverb tips that is going to help make your vocals sit way better in your mix. Let's check it out. Alright, so now before we jump in, I have a free gift for you that you can download 100% free. The link is down below. It's my vocal guide on vocal reverb. Everything I'm going to share with you in today's video is part of this PDF and more. Again, free download. The link is down below. Okay, now let's jump and talk about vocal reverb. We add reverb on a vocal to add space, in our mixes, which makes sense. You don't want to end up with a super 100% dry vocal sound. So adding reverb is going to just help to add some space in the mix. But sometimes, a reverb can take a lot of room in the mix. And there's ways I'm going to share with you today to have way more control over your vocal reverb sound. So this way your vocal reverb is not going to overwhelm your mix. Don't remember that your vocal is the main event, and we're going to keep it this way. So let's jump in CUBASE and listen to what we have. Okay, so this is the mix. It's a song from my good friend Josh Gilbert. The song is going to be released soon. So now I have that vocal reverb. That sounds good. Like for me, the tail of the reverb, the size of the reverb works for the verse, but it's a bit too overwhelming at its present form. So let's have a quick listen.
We had so much left to do together, but we won't get to it now. We knew it was coming.
Like I said, I love the size of the reverb. The tail is nice, but the reverb is way too much at the moment. So I'm going to fix a few things here. First of all, my number one tip, and this is something that I do, like I would say, for 98% of the time, every time I mix a vocal, the reverb I'm going to use for my lead vocal, I'm going to insert that reverb on a Knox channel or an effects channel track. So this way I keep my vocal in parallel from the dry vocal sound, okay, and not as an insert. Because you could, and a lot of people ask me the question, why don't you use your reverb as an insert on your vocal channel? And there's several reasons why I don't do so for 98% of the time, and one of these reasons is to have more control over my reverb. So this way I can craft my vocal reverb sound with way more flexibility. So I have those two channels separated. And this is something that I always advise people to do. Keep your reverbs on a separated effects channel. In my case, I use a stereo effects channel to do so, but this is a personal choice. It depends on the mix I'm working on. But for the most part, it's a stereo channel. And I'm sending as a send the signal from my vocal channel into this effects channel track where I have my reverb inserted. Next, and this is also something that I do a lot, is to EQ my reverb. Now, there's two ways you can EQ a reverb. You can EQ the incoming signal going into the reverb or the outcoming signal, the signal coming out of the reverb. Both will work well. And there's also, like on a lot of reverbs, you have access to an internal EQ, which is going to EQ the sound of the reverb, and on some other reverbs, you can EQ the incoming signal straight from the reverb itself, like we do in CUBASE with the stock reverb plugin out of CUBASE, which is RoomWorks. In this case, we have an input filters section where you can add a high-pass, low-pass filter on the incoming signal that goes into the reverb. In my case, on this reverb, I also have some parameters to tone shape the sound of the reverb, but this is not what I'm going to do. What I'm going to do here is to use an EQ plugin, a stock plugin out of CUBASE, and I can insert that right before my reverb on the effects channel. And what I'm going to do here is the Abbey Road EQ trick, which is simply getting rid of low frequencies and top frequencies for the most part. And this is going to add more transparency to my reverb. Because with a reverb, especially on a vocal, we can end up with a lot of buildup when it comes to low frequencies and low mid frequencies. And this is what I'm going to, get more control over. So this way, my reverb doesn't take too much space, especially within those frequencies. And taming down those high frequencies also is going to help the reverb to sound a bit more natural, I would say, without hearing those high spikes, that we can end up with on a vocal sound. So what I have on this one is a high-pass filter that is going to just tame down everything under 500 hertz or so, and the same for my low-pass filter. Everything above 7K is also being tamed down. And on top of that, I'm adding a cut at around 2K. This is the mid-range, and those frequencies on some vocals can actually be aggressive, and I want to avoid my reverb sound to end up sounding a bit too edgy, So by trimming that down, I'm adding a bit more transparency to the vocals. So let's have a listen to that EQ on the signal coming into the reverb.
I wasn't ready to lay you down. We had so much left to do together, but we won't get to it now. We knew.
It makes a huge difference. I can still hear my reverb. The tail is there, but I don't end up with a buildup on the low mids and low frequencies.
I wasn't ready to lay you down. We had so much left to do together, but we won't get to it now. We knew it was coming, just didn't know when. But you took your...
Okay, so that works very well. I can also, like I said, instead of EQing the incoming signal, I can add an EQ after my reverb.
I wasn't ready to lay you down. We had so much left to do.
So again, it's a personal choice. I tend to EQ the incoming signal most of the time because I like to keep my reverb as pure, I would say, as possible, and not try to tone shape too much the reverb itself, especially if it's the reverb sound that I like. But again, it's a case-by-case thing. Nothing stops me on doing it the other way around in some occasions. But, those are the two options you have. If you want to EQ your reverb, you can EQ the incoming signal or the reverb itself, meaning an EQ after the reverb or within the reverb if you have access to an EQ. And this is also something that I do on my end. Now, my next tip is to add distance to your reverb so you keep your vocal up front in your mix. So to do so, there's a couple of things we can do. Straight on the reverb, we have a parameter called pre-delay, okay? And this is a very important one. And this is going to help you to keep your vocal up front, dry. At least the attack of the vocal is going to stay dry and out of the reverb. And by adding pre-delay, that will delay the start of the reverb. So this way, like I said, the vocal is going to stay dry, the attack of the vocal is going to stay dry, and then the reverb will follow. So let's have a quick listen, and I'm going to overdo it so you can hear what it sounds like.
I wasn't ready to lay you down. We had so much left to do together, but we won't.
So if you notice, the minute I have way too much pre-delay, my reverb is starting to sound like a slapback delay because the pre-delay is too further away from the dry signal. So it's just a matter of balance and just to find the sweet spot so you keep your initial vocal attack dry and then you can hear the reverb.
I wasn't ready to lay you down.
So that works pretty well. Now on most reverbs, that pre-delay parameter is going to be calculated in milliseconds. Some will give you access to sync that value to the tempo of your project, but most of them won't. Okay, so you're going to need to calculate. If you want to just keep that in sync with the tempo of your project, you're just going to have to calculate the amount of milliseconds, like 1/16 of a note, which is the average, is going to give you in milliseconds according to the tempo of your project. Now, on my free PDF guide on vocal reverb, I have a formula that you can use to determine how much a 16th of a note or an eighth of a note and so on in milliseconds is according to the tempo of your project. So again, download this free guide. The link is down below. Now, in my case, if I want to, I can activate this little guy here, and that will make my pre-delay sync to a 16th of a note. That can work well. So that is something that you can do if you want to sync that to the tempo of your project. Something else you can also do to make your vocal up front by keeping the tail size and sound of your reverb is to use sidechain compression on your reverb. So I have the reverb right here, and I have a compressor right after my reverb. And that compressor is going to be triggered by the incoming signal, which is the vocal. So for this to happen, you need to activate the sidechain on this compressor right here on top. In CUBASE, you can actually set that up from the plugin itself. But if you don't have CUBASE, by activating your sidechain on the plugin, that sidechain will be available on the send option you have here, and mine is right here. Okay, so I set the bottom the sidechain, the reverb sidechain, which is the compressor right here. So I am sending my dry signal into the sidechain of this compressor. So every time the singer sings, it will trigger the compressor, and the compressor is going to react according to the threshold and all those parameters that I have. So I'm using a fast attack, a 3-to-1 ratio, and a sort of fast release. Also, this is something adjustable depending on the song I'm working on. And if we listen carefully, I'm going to overdo it so we can hear what that sounds like.
I wasn't ready to lay you down.
So as you can tell, every time I have some vocal, the compressor kicks in and the reverb is out of the way. And then the reverb comes back and I can keep my tail of the reverb that I like so much. But again, it's a matter of balance.
I wasn't ready to lay you down. We had so much left to do together, but we won't get to it now.
So that's pretty cool. So now I have like, maybe 4 or 5 dBs of gain reduction when the singer sings. And it helps me just to keep my vocal dry and upfront and keeping that reverb tail that sounds pretty good. So let's listen in the context of the mix.
So much left to do together, but we won't get to it now.
I love it, okay? I just love it. So you can hear that tail, that reverb tail, but my vocal stays right up front. Now for tip number 4, add some effects on the incoming signal feeding your reverb. So let's check it out. So there's some stuff that can also add a bit more to the distance feel of the reverb and make the reverb sound a bit more interesting. For example, adding a flanger on the incoming signal. So I'm going to activate this flanger, very simple one from CUBASE, nothing fancy. Let's just monitor the signal coming from this effects channel. Okay, I'm just going to bypass the reverb. Okay, so that is the sound with the flanger that is going to feed my reverb. So let's add the reverb. Okay, now we're only hearing the reverb itself without the dry signal, so you can hear what kind of effect that sounds like. I'm going to remove it. That's pretty cool, so let's blend this with the rest.
I wasn't ready to lay you down. We had so much left to do together, but we won't get to it now.
It's pretty cool. It adds a bit of color Kind of like it. So this is something you can do. Nothing stops you on adding some saturation also. So let's activate the decapitator and go crazy a bit. I'm not sure I'm going to like this one for this mix, but it is something that is pretty useful on other mixes.
I wasn't ready to lay you down. We had so much left to do together, but we won't.
Okay, so like for me, that's too much. But again, it's quite cool, you know, because the reverb itself with the decapitator or any type of saturation plugin can end up pretty interesting. No, and again, there's a lot going on here, but just a matter of balance. But that can be a good option as well, just to craft the tone of what's going into the reverb. Something else that I like to do is to add a compressor on the incoming signal that is feeding my reverb. And this is especially if I'm mixing a more dynamic vocal. Now, at the end of this verse, the vocal has way more energy going on. And by adding a compressor, it's just going to even out the dynamics, and I'm going to have way more control on the signal feeding my reverb. So let's have a listen.
But you took your last breath on earth, and now your true life begins.
Okay, let's add the compressor.
But you took your last breath on earth, and now your true life begins.
Okay, so that gives you an idea. But again, this is something that I do only if I'm dealing with a dynamic vocal that can be useful. Just to add a bit more control, dynamically speaking. So this way, you know, when you have like boost of energy or spikes and stuff, that can affect the sound of the reverb and just bring that reverb to spike up a bit, you know, especially on higher frequencies. And just by adding a compressor before it hits the reverb, it evens things out. So that is a very good option also. And for the last tip is to use automation on your vocal reverb. Now there are several ways you can do so, but adding automation is just going to make your mix sound more interesting. But again, it's a case-by-case thing. And on the mix that I'm working on right now, I do a form of automation because the verse vocal doesn't have the same amount of reverb compared to the chorus lead vocal. In this case, what can be done is to bring down and automate the level of the reverb straight on the channel itself between the verse and the choruses, because I'm relying a bit more on delays when it comes to the choruses compared to the verses where I use a bit more reverb than delays for this mix. So an option is to just automate the level of the effects channel track where I have my reverb inserted at. Or I can also just automate the incoming signal, you know, the send level signal going into the reverb channel. And that can be automated also. In my case, though, I have two channels for my lead vocal. One channel is for the verse and the other channel for the choruses. So I don't actually need to automate the send level or the reverb channel itself. I'm just sending different amount of signal from each of these channels. So the verse lead vocal channel is sending X amount of signal to the reverb channel. And on the chorus lead vocal channel, I'm sending like almost 50% less signal to the reverb channel. So this is a form of automation. So I don't have the same amount of reverb for the lead vocal coming out of the verse compared to the chorus. So let's have a quick listen.
But you took your last breath on earth, and now your true life begins. This will be the last time that we have to say goodbye, even though my heart...
So you get the idea. Automation is a very good tool to work with when it comes to vocal reverb. So there you go, my friends. Those are the 5 tips I wanted to share with you. Know that you don't have to use them all at once. That's not the goal of sharing those tips with you. My goal is to give you more tools in your mixing arsenal so you can make better decisions depending on the mix you are working on. So I hope those were helpful. If so, share, like, and subscribe to the channel if you're not already. And don't forget to click on that notification bell also. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave everything down below. And don't forget to download my free guide on vocal reverb. The link is also down below. Until next time, my friend, take care and see you.